Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
So I hope you all had a great lunchtime and are not in a food coma, and so we can have here like slightly like a more interactive panel as well today. My name is Laurenz Van Ginneken. I'm one of the project officers at the European Liberal Forum, ELF. We are the official political think tank of the Alliance for Liberal and Democrats for Europe, who form the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament together with La République En Marche and the European Democratic Party. Today we're going to talk about, on a panel about philanthropy and the strategy for freedom. And therefore we have here a panel of 5 great speakers for you. I will let them introduce themselves briefly, and I guess we'll start from the left to the right. First speaker here today with us is Hedvig Morvai from the Erste Stiftung.
Hello, I'm very glad to be here, and I would like to welcome the audience. I'm also very much curious to know actually who is sitting in the audience, so I would like to find out that at some point. We just discussed with our panelists. So my name is Hedvig Morvai. I'm coming from the Erste Foundation from Vienna. But my real background is in Southeastern Europe and the Western Balkans. Prior to joining the Erste Foundation, where I'm heading the Europe and Democracy portfolio, I was dealing with regional cooperation, reconciliation, cross-border cooperation in Southeastern Europe and Western Balkans, and working on the Euro-Atlantic integration and democratization of these countries.
Thank you. And the second speaker we have today with us is Igor Czernecki from the EPC Foundation, but I'll let you do the explanation.
Hi everyone, Igor Czernecki. Thank you to the organizers for having me. EFC Foundation actually, but don't worry about it. I'm an intellectual historian, and I also work in the EFC Foundation, which is a privately endowed educational foundation. We also run a program called Philanthropy for Impact, which is a program which brings together like-minded philanthropists who want to grow and learn about systemic philanthropy and how to make a difference in the region.
My apologies for mispronouncing the name, and thank you. Next one is Melissa Huber from USAID.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon. It's very bright up here, but I can still see all of you, and it's great to see a number of people are interested in philanthropy. I work at USAID, and I have focused on Europe and Eurasia, and in particular on rule of law issues. I'm a lawyer, and before coming to USAID, I worked at Human Rights First, and was looking at not only human rights issues abroad, but also examining what was happening in the United States. And I'm glad that I can bring that to bear as we're thinking about rule of law issues internationally. Good to be here.
Thank you. Next one on our panel today is Patrick Oetting from Rising Tide.
Yes, I'm coming from the Rising Tide Foundation, where I'm a program manager. We're based in Schaffhausen, Switzerland. Despite my last name, I am originally from the United States, and I've been now in Europe for 3 years. At Rising Tide, I co-manage our Freedom and Practice portfolio, which is comprised of close to 60 grants right now around the world. All of these, we have a unique focus in that we're really trying to bridge theory and practice and really make a tangible difference in the lives of everyday people. We fund projects within 4 focus areas, that's system change, private sector solutions, teaching freedom, and empowerment of individuals. And really all of that's undergirded by classical liberal principles and philosophy. So we believe strongly in rule of law, limited government, moral agency, and individual freedom.
Thank you very much. And last but definitely not least is Casey Pifer from the Atlas Network.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Yes, I work with Atlas Network. Our organization connects about 560 organizations around the world in maybe 103 countries, I think, at this point. These organizations are civil society organizations, often think tanks, so they're often public policy focused, although sometimes they're less focused on specific policy endeavors and more focused on classical liberal ideas being made more accepted overall. Our mission is focused on the free society. We're focused on individual and economic choice for the most part, as well as rule of law. So that's what we do. My role is in grant making. So we offer lots of programming at Atlas Network, and a major part of that is grant making. And our goal is to sort of nurture this ecosystem of civil society organizations around the world that are advocating for these classical liberal principles.
Thank you very much. And actually, because when we look to the fields where you're active, and also to the countries and the geographical scope, we actually have here people from a worldwide network. And then maybe also a question could be, why is philanthropy needed to defend freedom? Why is it needed, for example, in liberal democracies? But also, why is it needed to have philanthropy to defend freedom in authoritarian and illiberal regimes, for example? I don't know who would like to take the floor first?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, besides the obvious, which is that the freedom movement needs funders, I guess I would say that, and especially when it comes to private philanthropy, we provide this opportunity for civil society organizations in the freedom movement, as we sometimes call it in the US, to have some credibility, right? Because I think without private philanthropy, what we're looking at then is political foundations, businesses, corporations, and things like this, which of course have their place, but in order to build an organization that is authentically local and credible to the local government and the local community, they've got to be not just driven by special interests, right? And then I guess my other main point that I would say about just philanthropy generally, is that we have a role to play when it comes to driving the ambition of these organizations in civil society. In nonprofits, we often we lack the profit motive, right, and the price mechanism. And so we really need philanthropy to drive us in the nonprofit space, these civil society organizations, to be focused on impact and not just activity for activity's sake. And so I think philanthropy and philanthropist foundations can do a lot to push in that direction.
Yeah, thank you. And
Yes, I can add quickly. I think at Rising Tide, we're very fortunate that we're a self-funded foundation, and very fortunate that our founder, an entrepreneur, thought it important to establish us with the principles that we were established under. I think one interesting thing, or why philanthropy is important, is because we're able to do two things, and I think one, or the way we think about it, is one, we're able to de-risk some projects. I think we're able to take on bigger risk that maybe a private sector wouldn't take, or maybe even a particular individual wouldn't be willing to take. We're able to take on some of those risks that a project could likely fail. And that's okay, because we're trying to do things that are maybe innovative on the cutting edge. And the second thing I think that we see in our funding is we can have a really long time horizon. So we don't need to have an immediate ROI on a project that we're funding. We can fund something that maybe it's building institutions. Maybe we're working with someone like the Atlas Network, and maybe the end result won't be seen for 10 or 20 years with some of the training programs or the education programs that we're running. But we can take that on. And I think a lot of, for example, corporate funding groups and others are looking for really immediate impact, and we can have a really long time horizon, which I think is crucial in our strategy. Yeah,
Yeah, and could you, or Melissa, would you want to continue on that, or?
I guess, yes, I would. I think that we are trying to figure out, as USAID, as a funder that tends to do bigger programs in, multiple sectors. We're trying to figure out both of those sides, both the immediate, how do we fund to try to have an impact now, but also prepare for impact into the future. Because I would say, if you're asking about why it's important for philanthropy to be promoted in, let's say, countries that are doing well in democracy. I think that countries that appear to do well, my own country, the United States, is an example of how democracy is not a given, and so we need to tend it, and so philanthropy is really important there. But then I think on the other side, it's all about identifying, learning and strategies that have that are working, that are new and changing and, adapting to new situations. And so we need to be connecting people across countries where there are new and innovative strategies and solutions. And that's, both those that seem to be doing well and those that seem to be doing poorly.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Igor, yeah?
Are we still on the same question, yeah? Why philanthropy for freedom? So I can only second what Casey and Patrick said about the appetite for risk, about the long-term horizon, about the necessity of local money, right, which is very important. And I can maybe add to that from the perspective of, from a more philosophical perspective, all being liberals here surely have read our Tocqueville very well, and we all know that Tocqueville tells us that there is a necessity in democracy to have intermediary bodies between the state and the individual. And of course, philanthropy is well placed to finance and organize those intermediary bodies, much better placed than organizations that depend on grants from the state. And also much better placed than organizations that depend on grants from foreign donors. So in that sense, there's a huge responsibility on local philanthropy to build those intermediary bodies between the government and the individual.
I would especially focus on part of the question, why do we need to invest also in countries which are considered liberal democracy with well-established systems? According to a Civicus monitor, which is monitoring the state of civil society all over the world, in 2018 they concluded that in 11 EU member states there was a process which led to narrowed or obstructed civic space, which means lack of access to policymakers, which means also lack of funding, which means targeted smear campaigns against civil society organizations, laws that violate freedom of expression and information, etc., etc. So and it can be now even extended to other fields, for example, with digitalization and with the emerging of large platforms, which we are all using and involved in. And while it seems that, you know, basically freedoms are becoming more and more easy to access. On the other hand, again, you know, there is a shrinking space, because then big tech firms, etc., they have mechanisms to control. The algorithms are non-transparent. So the legislation is missing, and in some cases there is too much, and in some other cases too little. So I think the situation, especially because it's so easy to imagine why in autocracies it's important to invest in civil society and in civic movements, but we have to be very much aware that this work is now becoming very important in democracies, in well-established democracies as well.
Yeah, indeed, because as a famous quote, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, the quote goes, "The price for liberty is internal vigilance." And it's actually civil society that helps us to stay vigilant. And do you maybe have like one concrete example of a project that you were supporting, or an organization that you were supporting that you actually could see, like, that you consider as a good example of your philanthropic work that actually managed to fight for freedom? Whoever wants to go first.
So this isn't a European example, if that's okay, but I just arrived yesterday from a visit to Burundi, which is one of the I think it's the second poorest country in the world on some rankings in Africa. And there's an organization there that is a grantee and has been a grantee of ours, I think, since 2016. And this organization, it's a great example of our model, which is that we sort of identify people with a vision, right? So we identify people who say, like, I can do this, and it's big. And the vision is big, and it's not small. It's not about how hard the environment is, it's about the vision. And then we invest in those people with skills building and with small grants, and we build trust. And then as we build that trust and as they kind of prove their ability, we make bigger and bigger investments. And this organization in particular they probably have the most, in terms of just raw numbers, influence on policy than any of the organizations in our entire network, and they've only been founded since 2016. They've liberalized trade, they've simplified the process to register a business. They've ensured that women can get property titles. And this is pretty inspiring, obviously. But what has been even cooler is that we've really pushed them to become sustainable. And when I was there, actually, we spent time in their office space, which was donated by a local donor. And I was able to meet with probably 10 different of their local donors from around the community, and you hear all the time there's no philanthropy outside the United States. Well, in Burundi, the second poorest country in the world, this guy made it possible. So I think it speaks to the importance of finding people with a vision.
Yeah, I had a project on my mind, but I realized that I'm actually sitting in Poland, where my personal example began. I took part in a leadership camp. It was a program designed for young leaders, and it was a 2-week camp for 30 young people coming from Serbia, from civil society, from political parties, from media. I was representing a student organization back then, and we were in Myślenice, next to Krakow, and all these 30 people who went through this program, they never ever stopped again fighting for peace and democracy and being engaged in the society. It's also my entire career was devoted to this work. And ever since then, I strongly believe in investing in capacity building and in generating change makers. And that's why I think that especially working with the next generation when it comes to how to fight for freedom, democracy, and also peace, long-lasting peace, and the basic values and principles which we still consider existing, but which are very much eroding. I think focusing on the next generation and building up capacities of this next generation is one of the examples of this work.
Like really a spark to keep that that fire of freedom going and nurturing that. And so Patrick also wanted to intervene on this one.
Yes, I'll quickly, because Annette is in the room here, and they've been an incredible grantee for a partner for before I was at the foundation. And there's three things maybe we think about when in our funding process. One, who are they? And so Lithuanian Free Market Institute is just incredibly talented organization from the top to the bottom. I found out yesterday that they've been operating in Lithuania for 33 years, since 1990, and quite possibly the oldest civil society organization operating operating there, defending freedom. The second thing we think about is what are they doing, and I find that Lithuanian Free Market Institute is always coming up with timely projects, very interesting projects, that are engaging Lithuanians broadly. And then the third thing we think about is how do they do it? How do they implement it? And they have an incredible ability to implement projects. They have, they're so close to the people that they're working with, and they're so in touch with what they're thinking, what they need, that almost inevitably every project that we've worked on with them has been more successful than what they even anticipated. So I think they've been kind of a really good partner of ours that's in this region.
Yeah, thank you very much. I must say also from ELF, whenever I see what the Free Market Institute is doing in Lithuania, it's truly inspiration also for many other of our members throughout Europe. So that also Igor wanted to intervene now.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to MDIF, the New York-based Media Development Investment Fund, for saving Gazeta Wyborcza a couple of years ago, and now through Pluralis, which they also manage, Rzeczpospolita from hostile takeovers. So this is something that I wish we could see more local money being put towards saving the independent media, which are obviously a great threat. And more locally, SOK here, Katia, for example, who is doing a wonderful program teaching teachers how to teach Polish to Ukrainians, and doing that, working towards dismantling that ticking bomb of potentially rising tensions between Ukrainians and Poles in this country. You know, so working towards social cohesion. So, great example there.
Yeah, literally making conversations possible and dialogue possible. So actually, thank you for that, and actually also an applause for the work they're doing here. Actually, give them an applause because it's not easy to get people teaching new languages. And then also, like Melissa.
Sure. I think that I would say that USAID has just started funding in Central Europe, but one program that so far I'm very pleased with is a program in Hungary. We are supporting a sort of a coalition that is in a smaller city. It's not in the capital. It's in Debrecen, which is, you know, a place that is very much a stronghold for the government. But there are a number of both larger civil society, well, larger in the city, which is not very large, but civil society organizations and civic movements that are very small and nascent, and student movements that have come together, and they all have office space in one location. And so they are able to, they have a very local media outlet. If you may know that the media industry is the media market is very distorted in Hungary. So they have an outlet that is, you know, this big, and then they have an LGBTIQ student organization. They have an organization that is, you know, connected to the Civil Liberties Union there. And they have an organization that has been combating a Chinese-funded battery factory that's polluting their water. And they're all sharing information about, you know, when the government is meeting with the Chinese about the battery factory, how this is impacting their families, what strategies can they use to come together and to try to develop more coalitions in their community. And so seeing that, those connections, that kind of networking is something that I think is really important. It's not always, capacity building and what you know, but who you know. And if you could be connected to people from different perspectives and those that can help you develop new skills, new strategies in coping with your day-to-day as you're developing a new organization. I think that that's something I'm proud that we're supporting.
Yes, indeed, thank you for all the examples that we had here. And actually, I'm going to circle a little bit back to something that you said, Igor. It's about using also local money for philanthropy. And I thought that because we also had a preparation call, and there you actually had a good idea actually to ask a question to the audience. And the question that we want to, there are actually two questions. The first question then would be who of you is active in a philanthropic NGO? Who of you is actually actively participating in philanthropy or an NGO to make society, to make a change in society? You may just raise your hands. And how many of you are using actually also local money from local businesses, from the structures of your local, from your local society? As we can see, actually there are still some hands, but I think it went already into half. And for example, also towards you, what do you think that could be a threshold in here?
Sorry, what do you mean by threshold?
What could cause that that a lot of NGOs and a lot of local networks are actually not using the money from their own local communities, and also how could we maybe incentivize businesses to start working more in philanthropy?
Look, I think we're at a crucial moment historically in our region. By region, I mean CEE, where it's important to realize this, because maybe people in the West don't necessarily, that this is the first time in 200 years that there's a intergenerational transfer of wealth in our region in the context of sovereign countries. Right, so we did not have independence for the 19th century. Then we had one generation of independence in the 20th century without the possibility of thinking long-term about statehood. So this is the first time that this is happening. So in a way, it's not surprising that we are 200 years behind some countries when it comes to philanthropy, right? Of course, we have to catch up very quickly, as we have to do in other fields. And I think that process is happening. I think there's a few barriers in the way. I think that, for one, there is still a very deep sense that we are a region that is catching up financially, and that we need to build private wealth, not share it, right? And that's just a mental thing that needs to shift. But I think the second generation has a different outlook. I think there's a lot of fear. If you compare, for example, Poland with the Czech Republic. Czech Republic is a small country in terms of population, so if you want to be a billionaire in the Czech Republic, you have to do business abroad. And therefore, you are not as dependent on the attitude of your government when it comes to your business continuing to grow or develop. And so we find that, for example, Czech philanthropists are much more audacious and much more ready to think of philanthropy in the systemic way which is necessary. Also because they're Protestants, probably, right? So, but this, I think this is a big difference with Poland, for example, where a lot of the wealthy individuals are wealthy based on mainly on the Polish market, because it's big enough to create that wealth for them, right? And therefore, they're much more conservative in what they're thinking they should do, and essentially much more afraid to do what needs to be done. So this is a challenge, but I think that the second generation has a different attitude here, and I think that there's a growing sense of responsibility, and a sense that these 30 years rule of law, market economy, and democracy allowed for this creation of wealth, and that now we need to be responsible for maintaining it for the next generation.
Yeah, CK, so you want to react to that?
Yeah, I wanted to build on it a little bit, which is we often see this, right, where organizations are fairly dependent on international or U.S. funding. And I believe your question is why, and I think part of the answer is that these NGOs, international NGOs and U.S. NGOs, are taking up a lot of space in the market, right? And so communities tend to think that part is taken care of, right? So I think that this is something we have to be aware of as funders, as international funders, and take steps to encourage and keep our grantees accountable for making that part of their work a priority. So something that we do at Atlas Network is require matching grants, and sometimes we won't give the grant until they raise the money, like half of the money. But sometimes we'll even say that matching grant has to be local. And so we're sort of trying to encourage this sustainable structure. The other thing I'll say is that often outside of the US, civil society organizations decide that there's no philanthropy in their country and they don't ask. This is something that we talk about all the time. We do a lot of training programming at Atlas Network, and this is something we talk about constantly, is that you can't just say it doesn't exist without doing the work. And if this grantee that I just visited in Burundi can raise half their money locally, then I would argue that Europe can do the same, right? And so, but it takes work and it takes risk. It's risky to ask people for money. It's embarrassing to get a no, sure. But that means that you need to have a plan, and a plan for building the credibility locally, for connecting, to building those relationships. And I think it's very possible.
Yeah, absolutely, and actually, if you want to have another example with that, it's actually myself, because I used to be a member of the Liberal Flemish Students Association, and we received a grant of Atlas once as well when I was president of my local section. I remember as well, because we had a lot of troubles when I took over there, and it was also because of the strategy that you had. If you want to have like this grant, make sure that you're reaching out to people in your own city. Make sure that you're building that network. We started to do that. We got the grant. We got our great debate that we wanted to organize. And afterwards, the sponsorships came in from themselves. And we started. We were becoming relevant again as liberal students on my university. We overclassed the Social Democrats. We overclassed the Conservatives. And we're actually spreading liberal ideas again within my university. As also thanks to your grant, by the way. So thank you very much for that. And actually, also going further on that, because I remember also from a preparatory call, there was another question that was raised. Because when we're looking at the grant givers, you support a lot, you need your support as well from local organizations. But sometimes there are smaller foundations that are not joining the largest structures. Why would that be, do you think? Like one argument could be like it's not existing here, for example, so we won't ask. But are there any other, for example, any other thresholds you could see there, or problems or troubles or challenges? Hedvig?
Yes, I believe I was one of the persons who raised this issue during the prep call, so I should try also answer it. Yes. There is an example. I mean, there are different coalitions of funders. There are pooled funds. For example, there is the Civitates Fund, which is established for helping civil society in Central and Eastern Europe. And I was actually thinking about how important it would be to open up exactly that kind of structures like Civitates is to local funders from these countries, that it could be very much rewarding, and it would change the dynamics also of not of strategizing about the work priorities. Obviously, there are always consultations with the civil society in these processes. So I myself, I am part of the steering committee of the Civitates Fund, and we always have regular meetings with the civil society organizations we are working with, so that we know actually what's needed on the ground. So it's not us who try to figure out what would be the best way to go, but we are trying to listen to the partners, and then we are designing the mechanisms in order to answer that need. But I think it would be even more kind of inclusive and strategic if there would be local funders joining such pooled funds, and it would communicate a completely different message to the communities, but also to the political structures. Especially, we just discussed it before this panel, how difficult it is to convince local funders to invest into topics like democracy, freedom, etc. So I think if local funders would join that structures, maybe they could also overcome this obstacle. It would not be they standing alone with these very controversial issues sometimes, but they would be joining a larger club which represents these values and this work.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anyone else that want to react, or Igor?
Can I just ask you to develop this thought a little bit further from, for example, from the perspective of Civitates? I intuitively understand why it's so important for local money to be put into these pooled funds, but apart from the fact that you have more firepower, what does that give you from the perspective of the fund that would help you with your mission?
Well, I think naturally it gives legitimacy to the entire exercise, because it's not, again, someone comes into a region or a country and trying to impose or is meddling in how it is in many cases perceived, but it is in cooperation with the local actors, a real cooperation. So it's not only this relationship, we come and give you money, we are the givers, you are the receivers, but it's in partnership with the community and a joint investment into the most important processes. So I think that the narrative changes completely, and the dynamics of these very difficult processes and projects, which are sometimes very demanding, could be also much easier to form and to explain, and to even maybe involve larger parts of the society in these types of initiatives. Because then it's not, just to take the example of, how the Open Society Foundation is being treated in Hungary, especially when it's contributing to investment in, again, capacity building of political parties or new emerging leaders, etc. It is completely different if this is the local. If these are the local actors who are doing this, and if they can partner with the externals, and that way basically provide a larger amount of resources for these kinds of initiatives, I think that can be only good for all sides. And these are not only two sides, but then there are the beneficiaries as well, the organizations who are working, but I also see the broader society as something what is understanding this probably then in a different way. Because we also have to understand, I assume that everywhere the situation is very much the same. It is so difficult to explain to citizens what civil society organizations do and why they are needed. And especially if there is a negative narrative from the government, then it's even more difficult. And when can you see a positive story in the media about any of these successful initiatives you just mentioned? It's impossible to communicate this work. I mean, anyway, it's impossible to communicate anything positive which is happening, because bad news are actually the ones which are reaching the largest number of readers. But I think that these kind of exercises and partnerships could also help this communication with the society itself, the citizens, to understand why this work is so important and what work actually these organizations, who are many times treated as foreign traitors and whatever, why their work is important. Because they are doing work what is simply not covered by the structures of the government, and they have to fill the gaps. So I think this could be one of the elements as well.
I think that no one can say it better. That was really well said.
Perfect. Thank you very much. But indeed, we do see those struggles here. But maybe we could try to open the floor, maybe also like a little bit towards the audience, because we had some questions indeed that we were answering here, but at the same time, there was partially also a question for the audiences, for example, because actually, do we have any, for example, business owners in here? Is there anyone who has their own business or their own shop, or let's see, I see just one, I see two, and is any one of you, for example, also funding NGOs or like funding through your company or?
So who are we talking to then?
To the NGOs.
So you all know this stuff, right?
Because like I saw first a question from a madam here, and then afterwards I'll come to Tom, and then we'll take as many as possible questions. But first to the madam here in the middle.
I'm Katja Roman, SOC Foundation. I just have two thoughts about what you were just talking about in particular. So one thing is about Polish NGOs and the way you're very well aware of how our country, of the moment that our country is in right now. And I believe that Polish NGOs will need to look for stakeholders other than financing from the government or from government-funded foundations, because the system here has been skewed towards government money going to organizations that have been created in the last 8 years. Therefore, the need for NGOs to go to local philanthropists or to specialized NGOs such as yourselves is even more important, to be less reliant on government funds. And the other thing, what you were just talking about a pool, in effect, of philanthropists. This is, if I can speak from the point of view of a small or medium-sized NGO, it's very difficult for us to approach a single philanthropist in this country, because you may have, I mean, it may be a personal contact, which is not, again, not something that you can maintain in the future. It's not, you know, that's not how we want to work. But in general, either the money will be very small, and in order to be able to scale anything, you can't have just a little, you know, a little donation. If we had a pool, there's a completely different way of pitching, because there's also a way to get know-how. But that's something that Polish NGOs don't have much experience in, because they didn't deal with philanthropists like in the States, where it's something that you learn when you work in an NGO. Thank you.
Next one was for the sir here in the front, for Tom G. Palmer.
I'd just like to make a suggestion that we drop the word philanthropist, because it suggests there's a special tribe of creatures called philanthropists, and instead of talk about people with money. They're the ones who can support you, so let's be very frank. And they can be doctors and lawyers, they can own a dairy or a small company that puts windows on buildings, all kinds of things. And the trick is to not think, oh, we have to find philanthropists, find people with money and ask them for it, which is for some reason hard for people to do, but it's a business proposition. If you raise money for your business, you're not embarrassed about saying, would you invest in it? We have a project, here's a problem in our community, we've come up with a diagnosis, and then, I'll just make a point, don't make the case for donating, ask them, which means you say, Patrick or Melissa, can we count on you for 5,000 zlotys to fund this? And then shut up. So they have to answer you. And I know people who've done this in countries like Burundi, where everyone said, oh, it's impossible. But there are people with money in those countries, and you just have to go ask them for it and convince them it's a value added. You're going to make life better. So if we could move toward that and asking people with money to share it for projects.
Thank you. And then I think the next one was next to you. Yes. And
Yeah,
then
thank you. I have a question which is quite systemic when it comes to Poland and whole region, like Eastern Europe, because I still think that we're by soul in Eastern Europe. Very often I think about the definition of water in a glass, and when it comes to philanthropy, we're thinking about fulfilling this glass with water, and NGO can take this water and give it to someone who needs this water. But I strongly feel, and from the position of the owner, CEO of an NGO, local one in Poznań in Poland, who takes care of education processes, that I really want to have resilience. I would love to have a situation when I'm not dependent from one person with money or institution or government which we can't count on, but I would be resilient. And I would like to hear, what do you think about investing in NGO in a way that they wouldn't need you in the future? For example, building a capacity for them to build their own business. Because when we think about, and we're on a liberal place, so we're pro-business, I strongly think that in Poland, when we try to build this capitalist society, we should strongly think that also non-governmental organizations should be able to build something that gives them not a profit, but money for work and not being dependent from the person of money. So how do you feel to building this concrete that they can build on?
yeah. Anyone who would like to react to that from the panel?
Yes, I can quickly respond. I think the first comment I thought was really good, and I thought this was around kind of reducing dependency on government funding. And I think this is really important and something we always look at with groups that we're working with. And we work with about 50% think tanks, so people working in the world of ideas and policy, and then 50% NGOs who are working more in the field of, they're directly working with the beneficiaries of their projects. So this might be training, education, providing tools, empowerment projects. And we always encourage, if they are receiving government funding, to find ways to reduce that over time. I think that's important because there can be lots of strings attached and things change and it can be harder. And it's better to diversify funding base. Then to Tom's point, I think I really like what Tom had to say and there's nothing to add there. And then I also think it's interesting, coming from the United States and now being in Europe for a few years, I think most people, and maybe this is decreasing, but most people in the United States see themselves as donors of some sort. They're donating to something, small, large, and a lot of US NGOs and think tanks receive a significant portion of their budgets from small gifts from people like my grandma, right? And maybe this doesn't seem to exist as much in many European countries I've operated in. So how do you create that culture? That's hard to do. That's really hard to do, I think. But maybe it starts with us in this room in terms of thinking of ourselves as people who are actually donors, not just the organizations we work for. And then I thought it was a good time to, I wrote down some quotes and I was hoping to sneak some of them in, so I was just going to quickly, this is from Richard Cornell, and he had studied philanthropy quite in the United States. He had done a lot of work on kind of libertarian, classical liberal approaches, and he said, a good society is not so much the result of grand designs and bold decisions, but millions upon millions of small, caring acts repeated day after day until direct mutual action becomes second nature, and to see a problem is to wonder how best to act on it. And I think that gets to that sustainability problem. So we always hope that we can exit projects and they can exist after us, but I think this is what we're trying to create, is a culture of mutual aid and exchange that doesn't necessarily need big philanthropic organizations to keep it going. It would be great if we could work ourselves out of a job, and I think this building of a free culture would happen at a civil society mediating level with individuals and communities taking care of it on their own. That's what we hope, I guess, to generate.
Thank you. Hedvig?
Yes, I would focus on this remark about how to make organizations capable to become sustainable and reflect on this entire. I mean, there is a huge discussion about the sustainability issue, and I find it sometimes very problematic. I think the key is to solve the problem. When the problem is solved, then you don't have to invest in the same problem anymore. But unfortunately, we are all dealing with so complex issues that they are very difficult to solve. On the other hand, I don't think it's fair to expect from civil society organizations to work out their kind of sustainability plan in a way you described. It can work in some cases. There are some organizations which do have the perspective. They are maybe dealing with topics which can be transformed also into a business which can feed into the work they are doing. In some cases, organizations are immediately registered in a way that they have both dimensions. They have as a company and as a civil society organization. So they use these both hats when they are working on their projects, and they fit what is the best for in the certain case. I think, you know, it's what is actually missing while I was listening to you is enough kind of, there is no systematization of the learnings, the best practices, the processes which can actually work and help organizations wherever they are. I mean, there are certain methodologies which work everywhere. Something can be copy-pasted. Some things can be learned and transformed. And I think there is a huge responsibility on our side, on the donor community, because we should, while we are dealing with these issues internally over and over again, why do we invest in something for 10 years? Is it now time to leave? What's going to happen then? How the sustainability of this should be solved, etc. We should somehow find ways to develop initiatives, processes which are providing this type of capacity building. And here I can mention one of the initiatives the Erste Foundation has, and it's called NGO Academy. And it is running in cooperation with the University of Vienna. And we do involve on an annual basis in different formats civil society, representatives of civil society organizations who come and they get the basic kind of capacity building, what they could then use, and it has been even upgraded with all kinds of additional programs, etc. So I think if something like this could be replicated maybe in some other formats or in some other countries or tapping into other regions, this could be one of the ways to have a more systematic approach to building up the capacity of civil society organizations, which would then also answer some of the concerns, what actually you said about how to approach single donors, how to fight back some of the negative dimensions of trying to convince donors, etc., etc.
Yeah, Melissa?
I was going to point out that there actually are some examples of, in very closed spaces, initiatives that have been able to crowdfund a lot of money. There's a legal organization in Russia that, you know, we contacted as the war was beginning and saying, you know, you are representing people who are being arrested and who are being targeted by the government, you know, how are you doing? And they said, we are flooded with money. Everyone is, you know, all of our country people are giving us support because they see how important this is. You know, similarly, we've seen that with some media outlets from closed spaces that have done a particularly good job, and they've been able to crowdfund a lot of money. The issue is that there's like a single entity that is getting that money. So I think that your point is that the learning needs to happen. And there I will just point out that one program that we are doing, that USAID is supporting in Central Europe, it's focused more on media with the distorted market, but it's looking at revenue diversification. And it's not just about, putting out media, it's about thinking of, how can you create a community? And so you might have to do more things like events or, producing something, maybe, I don't know, t-shirts, or there are lots of different ways to approach this. And so we're working with a number of experts that have been doing this in closed spaces to develop a diverse set of strategies that are targeted for each outlet to look at their audiences and what works for them. So I think it's that very individualized focus.
And then finally, Casey, you also want to react shortly, if I'm correct?
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on the resiliency, the last comment here, just that although I think it can feel like you're begging for money, and that feels like it's not resilient, donors are interested, they're getting something out of this, right? They're interested in the social change. And so if we can shift the mindset, if grantees, applicants can shift the mindset to, I am providing a social good, I'm providing something, and not that I'm begging for this person to give me a job. I think it can change the way we approach this and can make us a little bit more hopeful for that resiliency.
And we actually have, I guess, 1 minute left. So I'll take only 2 questions from you, sir, at the front, and from Madam in the back. But keep them very short, best a one-sentence question, and specifically to one person.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to react to what has been said. If you want to be sustainable, you have to invest in fundraising. You have to invest. Experts say, fundraising experts say, you have to invest at least 15% of your annual budget. Are we investing 15% at least of our annual budget into fundraising, into building the mechanism, into building procedures, into investing in prospecting, cultivation, and etc.? So when we started early on, we knew we had to build our fundraising and we had to invest, and we do that until this very day. And very early on, we built our donor base, corporate donor base, into 100 donors. That was beginning of Lithuanian post-communist independence. Everybody says there's no culture of giving. There's no culture of philanthropic giving. And yeah, you just have to build it. And one thing, if we are organizations that are mission-driven, we sell our mission, not projects. It's about mission. Most NGOs in Central Europe are just project-based. They live from project to project to project to project. We have a KPI in our fundraising strategy, which is 60% of fundraisers, of donors' money, is undesignated funding for our mission, not for projects. We have a program, we have a mission, our plan, and we sell it, we pitch it, and that's how you build a sustainable donor base who are with you for a long time. And then you need to have KPIs for retaining donors, for bringing new donors, and it's an everyday effort. So we need to have it in our strategy to invest at least 15, some say 20%, and do it on a daily basis and seek undesignated funding for our mission, not projects.
Yeah, just very quickly, LFMI is just a terrific example of what Annetta is talking about. And we do have to invest in fundraising. And the way to get to resiliency is to build that base so that now you're not scrambling. And part of how grantees can help funders in this way is to pitch your vision, not your small project. So pitch the big thing. Pitch what you're excited about, not what you think the donor wants. That's how you build the resiliency.
Yeah, and it's flashing here that time is up, but very short last question.
Very short. So for Hedvig, I chair Unhacked Democracy. We work in Hungary, and where we're going now is saying, okay, let's look at the business culture in these countries. How do we get businesses to defend the system, the free market, the open society that allows democracy to thrive? Take an example from the Israelis who've been defending democracy. How do we get Central Europe particularly out of saying, okay, what's good for my company right now? Because that's what the patronage-based authoritarian, electoral authoritarian regimes do here. So how do we get that mind shift? What can we learn, especially from the United States, where we have this deep civic business culture? What can we learn over here?
And like one person to answer it very briefly. I'm sorry, because like we have to take my time. Anyone? Yes. Yes, Melissa? No. Just yes. Just do it. And I do think this might sum up indeed, because like we didn't hear like just one strategy. There is no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to the fight for freedom. And indeed, maybe we should indeed stop saying philanthropy and start speaking about the people with money, but not only people with money, but also the people who believe in freedom and how much money they have to spare, from a little dime to a few $1,000s. Every dime counts, as every person counts in our struggle for freedom. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel, and have a great Freedom Games. Thank you.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.
Jestem z zawodu lekarzem. Zajmowałam się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
Dzień dobry. To znaczy, myśmy się dzisiaj widzieli. Wie pan co? Ja zmieniłem zdanie i chciałbym poprawić. Karty. W urnie. Dobrze? To ja sobie poszukam.
Serio? Pan sobie poszuka? Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, by zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez PiS-u.